Hello and welcome to this Topical Life. Today we have Erik Kilgore, a special guest, because all my guests are special. But Erik and I were we were going to record this past Saturday, but today's the day, you guys, because since I passed that kidney stone, I'm alive, and Erik's here to be with me. I had to cancel for the first time ever. So I'm so glad you could be here, Erik, to
Yeah, thank you.
unfold
Glad you're
your
feeling better.
story. Yeah, seriously, right?
A terrible thing.
Yeah, I was like, I don't feel so good,
Yeah.
and I'm usually like not a canceler. So
Yep.
yeah, and you were so understanding. So here we
No problem.
are, the next week, and we have a heavy story here for you guys. So get comfortable, take a seat, take in what you're going to hear. But I think during this time of COVID too, it brings some light to some different subjects that we all might be dealing with or facing, or just heaviness in general. Before we get into that, Erik, tell us a little bit about yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, my name's Erik Kilgore. Thank you for having me on, Tiffany.
Sure.
Um, I was born and raised here in Portland, Oregon, my whole life. Native Portlander, which is seemingly hard to find these days. And for the last 9 years, we had a small family business. My father, brother, and I. My brother is or was almost 3 years older than me, and he tragically passed away December 9th, 2018, of a accidental fentanyl overdose. Um,
Yeah. So that's where we're going to start.
yeah.
Since then, and you are married and you have a 2-year-old, and his name is
Yes.
Henry. And you
Yes.
have a
Yeah.
podcast and a nonprofit organization that we're going to talk about that is
Hmm.
actually named after a Henry, or that
Correct.
has to do with your brother. But we'll get into that later. But we are going to unfold his story. And,
Sure.
one thing that you brought up before we started recording is just that your brother passed away not even 17 months ago. Is that
Hmm.
right? And
Correct.
and now during the light of COVID-19, just things are getting heavy, things
They
get
are.
brought up, and you started something really heavy, and your world's been opening up. And what inspired to do what you're doing now? Like, let's start from the very beginning.
Sure.
um
Yeah. Yeah. We can go back.
what's your story, dude? What's your story?
Yeah. uh, yeah. Growing up, my mom comes from an English family. Her mom was actually came over from London, and
Oh, wow.
so she was very um, heavily influenced, in terms of Catholicism. So we went to Catholic school our whole life. We went to Jesuit high school. And my brother was one of those ones. He had perfect attendance all the way from kindergarten through high school. Never got in trouble. Never. What they call at Jesuit a jug, a justice under God, where you have to, clean if you get in trouble or tardy for whatever reason. You have to clean tables during lunch or come Saturday and do yard work, whatever it may be. Never got one of those, which is, again, very rare. Very good students. Helped my father out in a previous business. He graduated magna cum laude from PSU in
Wow.
operations and logistics. All that stuff. Pretty typical childhood. Growing up. Parents married. I think, oh gosh, going on. Let's see, 50. No, it can't be 50 years.
Yeah, 50 would
40 years,
be.
I think. Yeah, 40 years, going on 40
Wow,
years.
that's
Yeah,
still
I think July. So I think
okay.
it was
Yeah,
1980. Um, I should know that date, but
it's all
so yeah,
good.
40 years. Wonderful parents, doting parents, all that stuff. So we had the typical, or I guess what people think is the typical childhood. We were never, you know, did drugs, or we drank a little bit in high school, things like that. Um, but for me, my brother, from what I've been told, my brother, um, when he was 17 or 18, is when he went to the the dentist to get his wisdom teeth pulled, and that was his first experience with opiates. Um, prescribing them, especially dentists. They prescribe opiates for wisdom teeth that, you could really just take ibuprofen for your pain. But
Yeah.
my mom told me after his death that she vividly remembers him saying, "Oh, I like the feeling of what that medication does." And to any parent or anybody at that time, and if we go back, this is almost 20 years ago. No one really knew anything about opiates at the time. That's when Purdue Pharma, the makers of OxyContin, they were just starting to flood the market with OxyContin, in 96, 97. So no one really knew. She never didn't really think anything of it. But it wasn't until after college, one of his good friends started introducing him to OxyContin. And James had no idea what it was, how addictive it was, things like that. And I think from what I understood was he was on it for about 3 to 4 months until he knew that he was addicted.
Oh.
And he had no clue whatsoever. And he tried to just quit, started going through withdrawals, started researching withdrawals because how awful they are. People say opiate withdrawals are like the flu times 10. um,
Mm.
so he went to my parents. This is just probably, let's see, he just turned 36, so about 14 years ago. I think it was 13, 14 years ago. um, and told him. And my mom, um, she's doesn't judge anyone, anything like that. She immediately hopped into action and started taking him down to the methadone clinic to get his daily dispense of methadone, to taper him off, to help
Okay.
with the withdrawals. I think over 90 days is what, from my understand. And this is, as we're, a little less than 3 years apart, I had no idea um, that he had any sort of, um, opiate disorder
Addiction.
for, gosh, I don't know, for up until maybe the last year before he died, year and a half before he died, I was told about it. Um, so, during that time, again, everything was kept hush hush under the radar. Didn't tell anybody. My brother told, you know, made my parents, swear that they wouldn't tell anybody. Just like, with addiction, there comes that stigma and shame around it. That it's a moral failure. It's the person's fault. Everything that comes with addiction, whether it's opiates or alcohol, whatever it may be. Um, you're looked down upon, and that has one part of what has created this epidemic is the stigma and shame don't allow people to seek treatment. It's one, it's very far, it's hard to find treatment, but also analogy that people that tend to say is, imagine someone having cancer. um, the neighborhood rallies around them, right? They help out with the parents, they bring over dinner or lunch or whatever it may be. And someone with addiction, same way, going through that disease, you know they're isolated basically. There's no one cares, no one wants to help out. So um yeah, so he, after that, the going through the methadone program, my parents thought, just okay, you're clean, you're good to go, right? So, and that's what many people think is once you're clean, it's over. But in reality, um, you know, uh, addiction is a lifelong disease that needs managing, just like any other disease. And so, looking back now, and hearing different things after his passing and whatnot, I personally believe he struggled on and off for 12, 13 years with opiate addiction. Um, and again, and to put things in perspective of how, we have this image of a person in addiction, and if you ask anybody, they'll probably say, "Oh, it's the person on the street, homeless, shooting up heroin, or meth, or whatever it may be." That's not the case.
Right.
My brother, he, again, like I said, we shared a room up until I was 18. We shared an office for 9 years, same office. Um, Never would have guessed in my entire life he had any sort of addiction issue. You know, again, especially with opiates, because opiates are odorless. You have that stigma of what you think someone with addiction looks like, and it's just not true. And it leads, to people not to, it's just, it leads to so many different things. You don't want to, I'm just trying to find the words here. Really what it comes down to is just you have that, what you think people look like with addiction, and it's just, again, it's not true. And
Well, and what too is that with parents, I think a lot of times too, like when suicide happens or
mhm,
that kind of thing happens, it's like, well, there's got to be something wrong with the family.
mhm,
What's wrong with the family?
yep,
Because everyone wants to look at that situation and think, well, I'm not going to be that person.
yeah,
Right. So, and the truth is that that's not always the case,
nope,
and that's what's so hard about it is that there really is no finger to point when we want
mhm.
to at all the time, so
Oh, it's very true. Yeah, yeah. Everyone wants to finger to point, and like, I know addiction runs on my father's side. His father was an alcoholic. Um, he didn't die from it. He tragically died in a flooding accident. But it runs in that side of the family, and from what we're now understanding,
genetic.
genetic, yeah. So that's something to look out on. It's I know when my son was born, they had a questionnaire of like, does addiction run on any side of the family, and you put yes. I believe it was father's side, so that's from what I know. um so yeah, it's and I'll never forget this after my brother died. Because I started thinking back, trying to go back to the year of 2000, 2001. It's so long ago, and trying to understand what the culture was like. And it was probably about a month or two after his passing, and Varsity Blues came on, the movie Varsity Blues. The high school Texas football players, how big football is in Texas and stuff.
Yeah.
And I can't remember the character's name.
Oh,
The wild
the cute
one.
one.
Yeah, it's not. I want to
Wait,
say
the one that
Skeeter,
was
but it's
always
not
like a
that.
train wreck. He
Yeah,
was
yeah, yeah. And
Tim Riggins.
no,
No. Oh, the one who had the one that was the main football player guy who
no,
had
he was like a
lives.
receiver. He was the party guy, and and we're
Oh, I'm
watching
thinking
the
of
movie.
Friday Night Lights. Sorry, never
Yeah, yeah,
mind.
yeah, yeah. Varsity Blues.
Never
This is
mind.
James Vanderbeek, going way back.
I
And
like the
he
cute
talked about,
one.
and he was during the skit, he just goes, he's talking about a penny drop or a drink, and he's like, it's a cocktail of some sort of alcohol or liquor, and a couple of Vicodin mixed in. And again, I was like, I love that movie growing up. I know a lot of kids did. And I go, my God, you think back about that and just how prevalent. I remember hearing about Vicodin when I was a freshman, sophomore in high school and stuff. Um, and I think about that, I'm like, wow, this wasn't a major movie. Just, hey, mix alcohol and a couple of Vicodin, you're good to go.
Right.
You know, so again, it was very prevalent, and those subtle little hints like, oh, it's no big deal, you can just do that. First of all, never ever do that. That's just an awful combination of
Yeah.
medication.
Yeah.
Two depressants. But yeah, it just we keep going back to this thing of trying to have an image of what people look like, what a person who has depression looks like, what a person who has a mental health disorder looks like, addiction issue looks like. We think we have these preconceived notions that the media has told us over countless years of what someone should look like, but it's not true. Um, uh, it's not true at all. And I can just speak to one person, my brother, where, like I said before, sharing an office with him for 9 years, never in my wildest dreams would I have ever thought he would have an addiction issue. Never in my life. Came to work, hard worker, he's high functioning, um, all that stuff. So yeah, so um, but that doesn't go to um, say there was issues along the way, for sure. What I can say is, looking back at those 9 years, there were the things of, and I'll talk about this, is, for me, I started experiencing pretty severe anxiety when I was about 25, out of the blue. Never really had anxiety in my life. Just one day it came on and didn't know what it was. So personally for me, I have Xanax, a small dose to help if I have a panic attack, whenever it may be. And for me, when I take Xanax, it calms me down. And what I did not understand until just the last couple of years is how highly addictive Xanax is. Did not know that, because for me it works like it should. Um, and many people, they find Xanax or OxyContin, whatever it may be, to help cope with their addiction. And going through that, I look back now, and there was a moment, probably 3 years ago. It's about 3 years ago where I would have I had my Xanax bottle, and I'm not a fan of flying. And so I was going to New York for my 30th birthday the next day, and my parents were over at our house, and my brother was too. And the first thing he did is, I'll have to go upstairs to go to the bathroom. And, before that happened, I counted out my Xanax to make sure I had enough for the trip, like I always do. And I go upstairs after they all leave, and there was, 6 missing. And again, you don't want to confront any family member about this kind of issue. It's just, first of all, it's just awkward. But
So let me say this right here. So at
yeah.
this point, and a timeline wise,
hmm
so you are 25, past 25, and he is 28.
So, oh, sorry. Yeah. So, I started experiencing anxiety when I was 25. So this was 5 years later. This is when I'm 30, about 3 years ago.
Okay, so
Yeah.
three years ago, and then, but at this point, like, so when you went to go check, has
hmm
there's always, since the moment that you found out that he had addiction problems, is that always something that you think about in your head?
Oh
Like,
yeah, 100%.
so like everybody's kind of on alert for your
hmm
brother with drugs,
But
so
not
you,
me.
but not you,
So
but what made you
yeah.
go upstairs and count the Xanax?
I can't recall.
Okay,
I
so you
don't.
had, at that point, you just randomly happened to,
Yeah,
you're
I honestly think it was just everyone left, and I walked upstairs. Actually, no, they didn't leave yet. So I must have had some sort of inkling. I can't recall
okay.
that something was going on, and it could have been as much as I heard a pill bottle shaking, and so I did count, and I mean, it's not like just one or two are missing. When you start going, oh geez, that's the other thing too, is you start seeing one or two missing, and you're like, oh, maybe I just kind of wrong. Start gets in your mind. But if people do experience that, keep a mental check on that. This time it was 6, and that's a large amount. When you have 15, you go from 16 to 9, or 15 to 9. That's a big piece of your medication missing. So I did confront him in the driveway. Walked up to him and just said, hey James, I'm missing 6 of my prescription pills. Did you take them? I counted them out just a few hours ago, and he said no. Um, and one thing that I always remember about him, anything with addiction, was when he was lying, he would always look away. It was never direct eye contact.
Hmm.
And I vividly remember when he said no, he looked his eyes were just shifted to the right, never eye to eye. And so I just had something, in my mind, it just didn't feel right. And so my parents actually were driving him. This was when we were living out in Central Oregon, and my parents were driving him home. Um, and during that 15-minute trip, he broke down and said, I did take him. Um, I'm very sorry about that. And he goes, I just want to feel normal. They make me just feel normal. And to a parent, that's just awful. Here you are, this jubilant guy, many friends, all that stuff. What do you mean you don't feel normal? And so when you start talking to people who are going through addiction, or who are in recovery, they take a substance to, what like they say, it's to make them feel normal. And that's something I never understood. I mean, and I'm just learning that out the last year. um, Whether they're trying to suppress pain or whatever it may be, or they have some sort of mental condition such as bipolar, to help numb that pain, or make them just feel like a normal person in society. um,
Well, let me stop you right there,
mm,
because I had somebody say the other day, there's this person who was upset with me, and the person said, you don't know what it's like. You take medication, so you just numb out your feelings. And I was like, No, that's not exactly. It makes me feel like who I am, but it's
Mm-hmm.
not an addiction. So
Sure.
like I take Wellbutrin and Prozac.
Mm-hmm. I'm the same
Um,
boat.
so someone that's listening might be like, well, I feel normal now that I'm on these kind of meds. What's the different normal for an addict
Sure.
than it is someone who's just on antidepressants? Like, what do you think
Sure,
about that?
sure. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like, I have a chemical imbalance in my brain
Mm-hmm.
that puts me on very high edge to the point where I'm having, you know, s- uh, panic attacks. That's not normal. That's not normal behavior. My brother didn't experience that. For him, it was the constant, and he talked about this for a long time and did see therapists about it. Is he had the constant flood of thoughts in his mind that
Mm-hmm.
he could just not. They would never leave. It was just nonstop, thoughts, just racing thoughts, and he just, constantly told my parents that it was just exhausting to deal with. Just exercising did help. They did help release those endorphins and help calm those thoughts down and stuff. And I'll touch on a story later on, but um, for him, like a depressant like Xanax, or say such as OxyContin, it does help ease that pain. It helps them with that mind. And for after talking to a couple, a therapist afterwards who has dealt with addiction for 15, 20 years, she did, she can't formally diagnose my brother, but did say that she believes he had some sort of on a spectrum of 1 to 10 on bipolar. She doesn't know, but some sort of low level bipolar where, and he talked about that for so long, and each therapist never even brought up bipolar, but just the constant racing thoughts, all that stuff. So he would take that, and it's very common. You talk to people in recovery, and it's very common for them to say that. It's they took those thoughts to either suppress some sort of trauma, pain they've dealt with, and or some sort of mental condition. Is research that people with an addiction have a high rate of um, co-occurring mental disorders, whether it's bipolar or schizophrenia, whatever it may be. So there is something to that, and so for him, it wasn't. For us, we get it's prescription. When we get our antidepressants, that becomes a prescription. We're not abusing them. For me personally, it helps me not have a panic attack every single day. I can live my normal life. For my brother, he would just, he would go up and take Xanax because um, it made him feel better. That's not like, I understand your question, but you're abusing drugs, and you're trying to find your own mixture of cocktail
Well,
to
in
help
a
ease
sense,
your
he
mind.
probably felt a little high.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah,
exactly,
like where I
and
don't feel high.
yeah, because you have to remember too, people who have an addiction issue, it's not just you're just taking one. You're not taking just one Xanax or taking one OxyContin. You're taking multiples. It's it's a different thing. Where for me, I take my one pill every day, and that's it. I don't go back and take 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pills.
Right, you're not thinking
Or
about it. The urge
drinks.
isn't
Yeah,
there.
yeah, exactly. The cravings,
Right.
all that kind of stuff. So
Mhm.
exactly. Um, so yeah, that was the one thing, where I did, catch him, and he did return the pills and stuff, and was very sorry about it. But moving forward a couple years, um, we can kind of skip forward to 3 years after that.
At
Um,
this point, he was 33.
Yes, when I was 30, he was about 33. Um, and then for our business, we both moved back to Portland. He moved back spring of 2018. I moved back at the end of summer 2018. And we have an office down at WeWork downtown, and we worked out of there. He came to work every day. Um, Again, never would have known. And um, I should back up and just say my parents did tell me, I think it was about a year and a half before he passed, about his previous addiction issues. And, from what they both said, James and my parents, is they both thought one of them told me. So James thought my parents told me, my parents thought James told me, but again, whatever happened didn't happen. So for me, I was always the one seeing James on a daily basis. And I would see these certain little things that you wouldn't even really pick up on, but it's just certain things. I was like, this doesn't seem right. Doesn't make sense. But again, I don't have any background, so I don't know what's going on. Um, so if I knew earlier, those are things I could have brought up to my parents or just, even talked to James about. Um, so it wasn't until the last month, he passed away December 9th. So it wasn't about the last month I started noticing like just pretty drastic behavior, not bad behavior, like not going out and shooting up or anything, or like what we think would constitute bad behavior, but like be in the office and his condo was only, I don't know, 10 blocks away. To say, oh, I have to go home, and actually wouldn't even tell me. You just get up and leave, and I text him, say, hey, where'd you go? Oh, I had to go home and get a pencil. I had to go home and get a pen, or I had to go do this. And it's like, kind of go, and you look at the desk and you go, well, you have a huge, thing of pen and pencils right there in front of you. You have a notebook right here. Just these little things never started adding up. And so, and then some of the not erratic behavior, but the mood swings. The last week before he passed, it was the mood swings, where he would just, like the Thursday night before he passed, there was an argument. I don't even know what, I think about a credit card, I think. And he just called me up and was just chewing me out. And I'm going, like I told him, I said, I was downtown all day. Why didn't you ask for it there? Like, I live way out in West Beaverton, during traffic, that would take an hour to get downtown for people who don't know the Portland metro area. That'd be a 2-hour round trip. And I'm just going, here I was downtown all day, and yet now you're yelling at me. I mean, yelling. And that's when I talked to my dad that night and said, I'm done. I'm done being treated like this. This is ridiculous. If something doesn't change, then, I'm gone. And, I vividly remember that conversation, like it was yesterday.
With
Just
your
because
dad or
I
your
knew
brother? With your dad or your brother? Both?
both. Yeah,
Yeah.
both. Just because I knew something was going on, and I couldn't pinpoint it. I didn't know exactly what it was. And the next day, my wife and son and I, we went to Central Oregon for the weekend just to get out of Portland. And Sunday, when we got back, December 9th, we got back around 3 o'clock, and I went to go pick up my dog from the kennel. And during that drive, my mom called me, like she did on most Sundays. Hey, have you heard from James? Because he would just kind of unplug from the weekend for the weekend, just, and I should say he would call my mom 3, 4, 5 times a day when he was walking to work or walking back around town or whatever it may be. He would call her all the time and just talk, just to pass time. So when my parents didn't hear from him, they would always get nervous. And again, it was always the weekends because he would unplug, be out with his friends or whatever it may be. And she called and just said, hey, have you heard from James? And I said, no, it's just a typical weekend, just haven't heard from him. But in the back of my mind, I just knew something was up. And so I called back and asked, and I talked to my dad for about an hour, and he was telling me about the night before, where my mom and my brother were on the phone for on and off for like 6 hours. James was just calling them. I should state that that Thursday morning before he passed, I apologize about missing this part, was he said, I can't come in the office. I'm not feeling well. I feel like I have the flu. Um, but when I talked to him, he did not sound like he had the flu. Like when you are distinctly sick with a cold or the flu, like you have that nasally or whatever it may be, he did not sound that way. So I think for me over the weekend, that's what kind of put me on edge, was when I talked to him those couple times, just he didn't sound sick to me. And I just had a feeling something else was up in my mind. And he just trying to, oh yeah, so I got back on Sunday, and my mom called, and so I talked to my dad for an hour, and he was telling me that the night before he was going through he had this craving for a video camera to start producing videos for the business, to do workflows on. And he just incessantly called my dad saying, have you made up your mind? Have you made up your mind? Have you made up your mind? And my dad kept saying, James, it's Saturday night. Like, I'm just having a drink here. We'll talk tomorrow, talk more about it tomorrow. and it was just, it's a normal conversation, but he was just going through this manic phase. I mean, serious manic phase of he had to have it now, 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 now. And so, the last time my parents talked to him was about 10:30, 11 at night. He called them and they thought he was in bed. And so my dad was like, "Why are you up?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm just outside walking right now, just getting some fresh air." And my dad did ask him, he goes, are you on drugs, James? Are you okay? And he goes, no, I'm not. I don't have a dealer. So don't worry about that. And, and, a couple hours later, he's dead. So, um, it was, so it was Sunday after I talked to my dad. I hung up the phone and I was upstairs with my wife, and she just looked at me and says, "You're going down to his condo, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah." And in the back of my mind, it was more of, I wanted to go down to, one, make sure he was okay, because maybe he wasn't feeling well, just to say, if he needed fluids or whatever it may be, but to also kind of hash things out, like, "Hey, James, if there is something going on, talk to me, tell me, whatever it may be." Um, but I did tell her, I vividly remember telling this, saying, um, I said, I don't think he'll be alive.
Wow.
And yeah. And again, I've had these calls every Sunday for the last 5 years. Hey, Erik, from my parents, have you heard from me? Have you heard from James? No. And I never in my wildest dreams think anything was wrong with him. Never. But that day, just something was up in my head, and drove down to his condo, and he was very friendly with both doormen, and unfortunately that day there was a new person, brand new, first day on the job. He was following the rules by the book, nothing wrong with that. So I was having trouble getting up to his room. The doorman even knocked on his door twice for me, and I said, "Hey, just, he's really sick, let me go up." And he called the manager, and he said, "Yeah, don't worry about it, I know him." And so I go up, open the door, um, and within 10 yards from me, from the door to where I was, he was slumped over on the couch, face down, stuck between, the way he slumped over was between the couch and his dining room table, and he was stuck there. And you know, he was cold. I mean, all of it. For me, it was, I can replay that image a million times in my head. The smell, the look of him, how the condo was lit, everything. And called the police. They came, and the detective, Detective Derry, he was spot on. I mean, wonderful, very nice guy, wonderful guy. And he told me point blank that night, just said, that he's been dead now for about 13 to 14, between 13 to 16 hours. We believe his time of death was like 3 a.m. And based on what we found, they found a small box, like an earring box, in his nightstand, that contained 30 pills, 30 press pills, of 5 milligram and 30 milligram Oxycontin. However, they looked identical. However, they were counterfeit. Um, very easy to make counterfeit pills now. Pill presses are widely available everywhere. And the way they knew was because Oxycontin's blue, these pills were white. And he goes, most likely, a 99% chance that he had fentanyl in one of his pills. And fentanyl, for people that don't know, is very strong, highly potent synthetic opioid that's about 100 times stronger than or 50 times stronger than morphine. It's very potent, very quick. It's used in surgeries, like when you give birth or whatever it may be. They do use that. People who are in late stage cancer, they have fentanyl patches to help ease the pain. But what's coming out now is because fentanyl is so cheap, um, they ship the fentanyl from China down to Mexico. It's all produced there, comes up the streets, and people, it's basically Russian roulette now with pills. They don't know what's in it, so you think you're getting one thing from your normal dealer, and you really have, they don't know. I mean, it's to say this, it's a lethal dose of fentanyl is equivalent to 3 grains of salt, table salt. So you're never going to know what's in there. I talked to the toxicologist after his report came out about 2 months later, and he had, let me get my thoughts here. He had a therapeutic dose of fentanyl, what you would consider taking in a medical setting, is between zero point 0.01 and I think it was zero point 0.01 and 0.1 nanograms, and I could be mistaken. It could be 0.001, but the dosage is just so strong that they measure it in nanograms. So 0.01 to 0.1, and he had a 4.35 nanograms of fentanyl in his system. And so, I mean, he was
4 times the amount. That's 4 times.
400 times.
400?
40 to 400 times the amount of fentanyl in his system. Yeah. So, I talked to an anesthesiologist who is working with fentanyl, and he just said, just to let you know, he was probably dead within a couple minutes, but it was very peaceful. So I don't know. I mean, yeah, it helps a little bit, knowing he didn't suffer, but the thing that haunts me to this day is knowing that he doesn't know he's dead. He was suffering that night. He was going through a manic episode. He was in distress, and he took that pill thinking it was just going to be a 5 or 30 milligram Oxycontin, and ends up on the couch dead. And that's a thought that probably, that goes through my mind, I don't know, a few times a day at least, just, thinking that, knowing he's not dead. And for me, and I'll be very honest about this, is what came out of that was, again, I'll go back to what we think addiction is, growing up, just what like the news and media has taught us is it's the people on the streets that have the addiction issues. Never do you question why do they have those issues? What's the root cause of addiction? Why are they on the streets? Why are they homeless with that mental health disorder or disease of addiction? So after his death, and I'll be blunt, I go through this question a lot in my mind. If I got called from a police officer telling me that the doorman found my brother dead from a drug overdose, what would have my reaction been? Because for me, finding him, I personally saw the devastation, the final straw of what addiction can do. But if I was called and told that, I don't know if I would have kind of thrown myself in like I have to understand what addiction is and to try to be an advocate for change around addiction.
Wow,
And
that's
I wrestle
powerful.
and I wrestle with that question a lot because it frustrates me. What's the difference between someone calling me on the phone and telling me that, hey, you're of course it's sad, it's terribly sad, but for me it's more of, what's the difference between your brother died of an overdose versus me finding him? And that's a question I wrestle with a lot in my mind, of how would I've reacted. And I don't know, because I wasn't called. I was the one who found him. So out of that, we're kind of taught, for me it was like, what does grieving look like? For the first week I was just in major shock. We had the ceremony, his funeral, I don't know, that Saturday. And when you think about grieving, for me, it's like, you think, oh, you're going to be in a bed or on a couch crying incessantly for the next like 5 months, eating tons of ice cream and this and that. And what I've learned is that's, everyone grieves so differently. And for me, I didn't want to, knowing James as well, I didn't want to sit there and just cry, and maybe that's just not my personality, but that wouldn't do anything. So for me, I just kind of threw myself into a bunch of, books about addiction and research and different podcasts and to try to understand why did this happen to my brother? I mean, again, it happens to 70,000 people a year who die of drug overdoses. Um, when we can go on about alcohol, alcohol kills 88,000 people a year. Suicide kills another 50,000. So we're talking about deaths of despair here that have ravaged our nation over the last 20, 25 years,
Yeah.
that kill this many people, and people don't even blink an eye about it. I mean, every single year, 70,000 people die of a drug overdose. Almost 90,000 people die a year of alcohol-related addiction, and another 50,000 people die of suicide. I mean, those are just insane numbers. Insane. And you go back to like 99, 2000, drug overdoses were 2 to 4,000 a year. And so it's an astronomical number that when people see it on the news, like I did multiple times, you kind of go, wow, that is a big number, but the news is
It's
over. And
something that you don't see.
no, you don't.
We're all searching for we want to see the guy on the street because he obviously has a problem, but it goes back to what you're saying. You saw something that no one else has seen.
Yeah. I mean, thousands of people have, seen it, but the issue is with, and I know what you're saying is the issue with addiction is it's been held in silence for so long, because you go back to AA, Alcohol's Anonymous, or, you go back to, even Narcotics Anonymous, or all the anonymous, right? It's anonymous. So you don't want to talk about it outside your group. And I'm not saying, and again, I'm not saying AA or NA or whatever. Those are amazing, amazing groups, and they help, millions of people. But the notion that you should be anonymous and not talk about it, that's what has kept these epidemics raging for so long.
Secrets.
Yeah, the secrets that just keep going and going and going. I remember the eulogy, because I was, the detective was, he was 99%, and he was, again, dead on after I heard the coroner report. My eulogy, my first draft of the eulogy, was laying that whole story out, because I wanted all 300 people to know what happened to him. Again, there was no coroner report a week after, so now if I go up there and say it and it didn't happen, he would have, had a heart attack, right? But in my heart, I knew what happened. I saw the rolled up Post-it notes. I saw the crushed up pills on the counter. I just know, because I just saw all of it, the destruction there, and I was shown the box of 30 pills. I mean, it's just, yeah. So I didn't want. And again, it's a lot to comprehend in a week, and it's still a lot to comprehend now, about drug overdoses. But for me, I wanted to be as honest as possible to the people who were going to be at his funeral, to say, this is addiction. This is what it looks like. Throw all your preconceived notions out the door. That's just BS, coming from the media. That's not what addiction looks like. This is what addiction looks like. It has a whole range of coming from this, either from the streets or all the way up to the highest functioning multimillionaire. Everyone experiences it. The people who are on the streets, who are homeless, they could be there because they burnt enough bridges where they don't have anybody to turn to because of their addiction. Or because of mental health disorders, and they have no one there to help. It's, we got to stop thinking, people who live on the streets are these awful people that, like, they're degenerates and stuff. Everyone is going through something, and we need to understand that. And instead of trying to shun people, we need to start creating a comprehensive system that addresses mental health, that helps people with, substance use disorders. Instead of, throwing them, it's frustrating. And so again, this is the last, 17 months where, about a month after he passed, I created a nonprofit called Henry's Uncle. Henry's my 2-year-old son. He was 8 months at the time of James's death. And it devastated me that Henry will never get to know his uncle. And that was the biggest thing for me. It just crushed me, because, he was so excited to be an uncle, and he was an uncle to so many of his friends' kids. And, I've seen so many, pictures of James and his friends' kids together and stuff. And I don't have a picture of that. And that just like to this day, that will always crush me. But for me, I started it because I also I want to help end the stigma around addiction. But for me, there was a lot of questions I wanted to understand as well. And I wanted to talk to the people who have gone through it, the doctors who are helping on the front lines, the advocates who have been doing this for countless years. I wanted to understand more about it. And so in that process of the nonprofit, I created a podcast called the Henry's Uncle Podcast, and it is talking to people, in addiction, in recovery from addiction, doctors, who are on the front lines, helping people with mental health disorders, substance use disorders. It's talking to other nonprofits about what they're doing, talking to companies who are trying to break the barriers around medication assisted treatment, to understand why are there so many gaps in our healthcare system that allow people who are vulnerable and who have an addiction issue to escape and end up dead, not help but dead. And I've seen it myself where someone who at the time I didn't know had an opiate addiction went to the ER, and in reality what they're doing is they're calling out for help. Yes, they may be asking for more drugs, but it's a call for help. And I've seen ER doctors say, basically, you're banned from this ER. Get out later. I've my board member, Bobby, who's been on the podcast. He had a alcohol use disorder. He's been sober now for 17 months, right before James passed, actually, and he's had his discharge papers say the safest thing for you right now is to go home and keep drinking.
What?
Yeah. So that's our healthcare system. They make it impossible. They allow, the federal government allows the doctors to prescribe, it doesn't matter how many opiates they want, to patients. But for them to be able to prescribe a medication assisted treatment, which is considered the gold standard of opiate use disorder, is like methadone, buprenorphine, all that stuff. The doctors have to go through a 10, 12-hour training, whatever it may be. And then they're limited to only helping out 30 patients for the first year. Then they have to go back and submit a waiver for additional more patients. And again, and in a MAT like buprenorphine, it's just a opiate. I'm going to totally butcher it here. So basically it helps with cravings. It helps with opiate cravings, so people can be on it and taper off, but live a functioning normal life. And so again, they, like for methadone, they make people go down every single day to a methadone clinic and wait in line to be dispensed their drugs. They make, and what frustrates me is all these policies in place that make it's like, you want to help, you're throwing billions of dollars at this. Why don't you just take these restrictions away? You're allowing doctors to prescribe billions of opioids, but you're limiting the amount of help they can provide. Where's
Right.
the logic?
Right.
So so
Usually
a lot of
comes
these
down to
policies,
money in some
oh
way.
yeah, 100% it comes down to money. And it just it's disgusting. And for people who are addicted or have an addiction issue, it's very hard to find a bed to help with detox and to get them in for proper treatment. Someone might go in and say, they might have that light that comes on and says, I need help now. But they might get, ring the phone and it says, oh, wait, you might have to come back 3, 4, or 5 weeks when we have an open bed. Boom. That person might not be around 3, 4, 5 weeks.
Like the
So
fact that, have you found that the fact that when people show up to emergency rooms usually is the last straw? Like,
no, I mean, that's just them, either trying to say I have an injury, I need more drugs for it. And or who are trying to get help, real help. And
cry for help.
yeah, and the ERs, a lot of ERs don't have policies in place that say, hey, this is what we're going to do. We're going to help you detox. We're going to get, if you can, we're going to give you medication to help you detox, so it's not painful or dreadful. We're going to make you comfortable, and then we're going to put our plan in place to have a warm handoff to a social worker, whoever it may be, who's going to help you find some sort of treatment place for you. They don't have that, and it's frustrating. And I talked to, and this was amazing lecture I went to at OHSU with Dr. Honora Englander, and what her team has done up at OHSU. And I was so proud that it's happening here in Portland. They basically have created that. They are working. They are doing everything possible to help someone with an addiction issue to find treatment and into recovery. And
Yeah.
again, it's not just in recovery is so many different things. It's not just being sober. It could be,
Oh, right. That's like almost the last.
It could be, do you want to use less drugs? Do you want to use drugs more safely? Things like that. And these are professional doctors, talking to their patients with, care and compassion. And I was so impressed with this lecture, and she was on the podcast too, to really show humanity and saying, I'm not going to say I'm better than you. I'm a doctor and we're going to put you in this treatment program. They may not be ready for that. What they may
Yeah.
want is how do I use the drug safer? How do I properly inject if I have to? Again, because injections cause, if you don't have a sterile needle, it can cause AIDS or HIV, or, if you hit the wrong veins or whatever it may be, it could lead to other diseases in your body. And they're really truly helping people out and talking to them with care and compassion, so they feel more vulnerable, and as they feel vulnerable, they start to open up and become them real selves and start asking for help. And that was and I truly hope her program goes to every single hospital nationwide, because you will start seeing real change.
Well, I don't know if you're aware, but I think when we were talking a long time ago, this is going on combat COVID-19, but my brother, a lot of the therapists over in Central Oregon have combined forces to the programs that go from hospital to patient right away. So they're prescribing. So the counselor's offices are able to prescribe medication right
Yep.
from the hospital to the thing. And it kind of sounds similar. I don't know.
They
You
so
could talk.
HSU, they do have a program where they are expanding out in Oregon, and they meet every Wednesday for training, all that kind of stuff, and talking.
Yeah.
So they are training other people around Oregon, other hospitals, and it's such a good model, and it's inspiring to see, and I love that, love the work that they're doing up there. Because again, I went to a RX summit last year in Atlanta, Georgia, where 4,000 people gather about the opioid epidemic. And the Monday, and this is about 4 months after my brother passed, I was with my mom, and the Monday we get there, it was just kind of like a soft opening session with a few, head, FDA officials and DA officials, things like that, up at the podium, and mothers were just screaming. I mean, just screaming at them, telling them same story. My son was in the ER a month ago. And you can't tell me he was in the ER a month ago because of an overdose, but you can send a sheriff to my door at 1 a.m. in the morning to tell me he's dead. Did you know how outrageous that sounds to me? So you see, and you start going, my God, this is just 4,000 people. And the amount, and you just start multiplying, and you start thinking in your mind, you start multiplying that around the nation, just how big this epidemic is. And I'm not just going to say opioid epidemic, it's an addiction epidemic. We have to get away from just strictly opiates. It's meth, it's opioids, it's alcohol, it's cocaine, it's everything. Stimulant overdoses are on the rise, opioid overdoses are on the rise, alcohol deaths are on the rise. It's awful. It's terrible to see. And the fact that we don't, as a nation, don't have a comprehensive strategy around it. I know our country just loves to throw money, and that's wonderful, but if we're going to throw $1 billion without no strategy, that's $1 billion gone.
Well, yeah, I was watching, there was a documentary on Netflix a while ago that just blew my mind about eating disorders, and how like people will get into the eating disorder clinic, they're there for 60 days, they're totally not recovered, and they have to be dismissed because their insurance doesn't go past that, and there's no, I mean, it's like those people, they do a follow-up 6 months later and their addiction is actually worse. Like,
It's the same.
complete waste.
It is. And, like same with
It's a lack of
addiction.
understanding the disease,
Yeah.
and also money. I mean, it was like those people checking them out knew that that was what
Mhm.
was going to happen. I mean, they do what they're supposed to do. They weigh those girls or guys into, and they
Mhm.
do what they're told, but they know this person's not going to recover.
Yeah.
Like, you know,
100%. And, same with addiction, it's just eating disorder. Same with a drug or alcohol disorder. You go to an addiction treatment for 30 days. That's barely enough time to detox,
yeah.
and you got to think of the amount of damage your body has been through, and for your brain to reset and your body to reset, and the therapy, that's months and years. It's not just 30 days. So, we have to get over this hump of 30 days is the cure. It's not at all. It's wonderful that you're sober. That's great, but there's so much more that needs to go into it. And especially now with COVID happening, you know,
Oh
15%
gosh.
unemployment. And again, it's going to go both ways. We're seeing, this is just in 2 months, if that, just 15% unemployment. You're talking about social isolation,
Talk
physical
about
distancing.
secrets.
Yeah, secrets. Everyone's routine has changed. It's no longer, people who are in recovery, routine helps them out so much. Waking up, showering, going to work, coming back, making dinner, working out, going to bed. Now that's just totally gone, right? So you add in the stress, the anxiety. Am I going to have a job tomorrow? All that stuff. Those are relapse triggers, and you see reports coming out now around different counties in the U.S. And overdoses are on the rise. Overdose calls are on the rise. People's habits may change. Where I'm done with like if you're in college, I don't know, or if maybe work has come down a little bit. I'm going to have a cocktail during lunch. And that starts to lead to every day. And then I'm going to have a couple more cocktails, and then again it starts snowballing. Right? You don't even know it. So it's awful to see, and there are projections, there are models out there that in addition to what's happening right now, that they're expecting an additional 75,000 deaths to occur
Oh my
just in deaths of despair. So when you talk about the 90,000 people who died of alcohol, the 50,000 who have died of suicide, and the 70,000 who died of drug overdoses, they're tack on another 75,000. So all this progress that as a nation we're trying to make, and I hope it doesn't. It's gonna. This pandemic is just making things so much worse, and really, what this pandemic is doing is showing how fragile our healthcare system is and how much it needs to change.
yeah.
We all knew it, but it's really exposing those gaps, and very clearly. And so, on one hand, what this pandemic has done, it has loosened rules where telehealth is becoming huge. So, um, people like a company here in Portland called Boulder Care, people who have an opioid use disorder can go on and sign up for an app, sign up for their program, and they get linked to a doctor via their app any time of the day, and they can get prescribed buprenorphine. So they don't have to go to the doctor's office, or they all that kind of stuff. So they're reducing barriers, and telehealth has been so long coming that luckily those barriers now. So instead of saying, oh, it's a daily prescription, they're allowing a 1 month prescription. Methadone, they're allowing, not in all areas, in some areas they're allowing 2 to 4 weeks of take home. So again, and people think, why is that a big deal? Well, think about if you had to go, say, I'm just going to pick anxiety as a mental disorder, as that's what I have. If I had to go to a clinic every day, wait outside in a line of 100 people, 50 people, whatever it is, and wait for my medication as cars drive by, do you know how demoralizing and embarrassing that is? As people look, going, "Oh, what's wrong with that person?" You know,
Yeah. Or the
um,
time that it takes.
yeah, exactly.
I
The amount of
mean,
time it takes, all that stuff, the inconvenience. So in some aspects it has loosened rules up for the better that people have been advocating for so long for, um, but it's not enough, and there's so much change that needs to happen, um, and it's just very scary times with people who are just newly sober, who haven't built that
yeah.
connection around yet.
Right.
What are the tips and tricks? I mean, it's just, so much of a, you know, the famous quote is the opposite of addiction is connection. And it's very true. So people who go to their daily, weekly, whatever it may be, AA meetings, NA meetings, um, they get to walk up and hug their friends, be open and honest, have that eye to eye contact, now at the Zoom meetings. So everyone's home by themselves or with their loved one, whatever it may be. There's not that intimate contact anymore. So it's very scary. And we don't want people going back into, people relapsing. That they are, it's very sad to see and hear, but it is happening. And it just, it's a very scary time because for us, for everyone, the fear of the unknown is the biggest fear of all. And right now there's no clear cut answer for any of us
Yeah.
of what's going to happen. We know there's going to be uncertain times for the next, I don't know, I'm probably going to say a couple of years. Um, and unless there's some sort of miracle vaccine or whatever that comes out soon, but this new normal, where we can't go to restaurants, and you think about the hospitality industry and how many people that employs, and it's just, there's just so much to it, so much.
Well,
And
and like you open up the restaurants, but then how long are those restaurants going to last? Because they've been
yeah,
like,
and so the uncertainty of your job,
yeah, this is not a quick fix.
no, it's not. And wonderful, you might get that PPP loan to be open for a couple months, uh but if sales aren't there, they're going to have to keep letting people go. So it's just this constant cycle of fear, of the unknown that's going to happen. And it makes people very uneasy. There's a lot of unrest, um and a lot of that, the news doesn't help. The constant, it doesn't matter if it's left or right, I don't care about that. The news is just always trying to grab headlines and kind of do fear mongering and all that stuff. And so for me personally, I was feeling that, for during this pandemic early on, my anxiety was very high. For the first week I was like just not even eating. um Now knowing what the new normal looks like after that first week, I just kind of adapted, and you kind of settle in. um and but for me it was like, you're on social media and you just see the constant negative news and the people bashing each other. And so a couple of days ago I just quit all of it. I'm like, this is ridiculous. And I know within 24 hours my whole mental state improved dramatically. And so for me, that was that. It's just, there's just so much out there, and it's scary. And I had a person on the podcast. I'll be releasing it next week. He's a person who's Lance Orton. He's been on the podcast before, and he documented his recovery, or talked about his addiction and his recovery. And he's so well spoken about his recovery, and he's very faith based in his recovery, and very service oriented. And he was recently furloughed from his nonprofit work, and it was scary. And he just said, I'm just going to keep going. I'm not getting paid right now. But what he talks about a lot in the podcast is being able to surrender
Mhm.
to the unknown. And that was a very powerful message, he was saying, because that can translate to so many different, it's not just addiction. It can translate to so many different parts of our lives, where instead of trying to control every aspect of your life, if you just surrender to it and let it happen, things will just start coming naturally and a lot more easier. And there's not so much stress and built up tension. So yeah, and luckily they got a PPP loan, and so they're going to be back up and running. Um, so he has a paycheck, but there was that uncertain time of he's in recovery, he's working for a nonprofit, and he's trying to make ends meet. Um,
Yeah.
it's tough. It's tough for a lot of people out there right now. So it's it's not just people with addiction, but mental health disorders, or just anybody. So if people are complaining to you, don't say, oh, your important, your issues aren't that important compared to what's going on. Well, for them, that is their issue.
Yeah.
So
One thing I keep thinking in my head as you're talking is like fear, that word fear, such a
mhm,
bad word. But
mhm,
I would say like the opposite of fear is love,
mhm,
and planting those seeds, like when you're saying like online and stuff. And, I think now, we're looking at individuals, like I'm looking at my friends who are next door, um, and I think everyone has a fear of being judged,
Hmm.
and that
Totally.
a lot of it has so much to do with fear, though, like the fear, what the fear causes. And now fear is divisive, and fear
Hmm.
can make you go in, it can make you go addiction route, it can make you do those things. But like for me, I do not have an addiction to that.
Hmm.
What is one thing I know I can do? And that is, my neighbors. Like, as small as that sounds, is like, it's not necessarily, there's so many things I can do. But when
Hmm.
someone says to me, I'm so pissed because da, 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 da," I'm like, yeah, I see where you're coming from. But, I'm like, yeah, that's just their road. I'm
Yeah.
like breaking those barriers, the
Yeah.
fear barriers of just breaking those down, and for someone, and to planting those seeds and planting that love. And who's to know that that person down the street is going to come and say, you know what, I've been really struggling. Like,
Yeah.
you become that person who's fearless and
Yep.
full of love, opens the door for someone to maybe come to you and be like, I'm struggling,
Yeah.
you know no judgment here. Like, that's part of why I do this podcast, is because
Yep.
of that. Like, I want everyone to know this is a not judgmental place, and that any guest who comes on here is open to being able to talk and all that kind of stuff, but living your life not in fear too.
Hmm.
Just, you just never know who it affects.
Exactly. And it's funny that you say that, because for me, for the longest time, when I first started, understanding that I did have anxiety, um, I kept it quiet for so long until I finally told a couple people, because it was affecting my life. I wasn't going out anymore. I was staying at home. I mean, going across the street, I remember going to a restaurant that was literally 1,000 yards away,
Sure.
and I was just getting anxiety. I could see my apartment at that time, but I was getting anxiety because I was away from home. And so, um, when I started finally opening up to my close friends, they're like, "Oh, dude, I have that. I have anxiety. I've seen a therapist, all that." And I'm just kind of like going, "Oh." And then you start talking about more and more, and everyone's like, "Yeah, I have it." And so it just becomes normal. Everyone's going through something, and I think as Americans, we have a very hard time being vulnerable and opening up about our mental health, just because of the amount of stigma there is around it. Like, there was a great analogy someone said. It doesn't matter. The federal government could throw a few $100 million and create millions of recovery beds, for people to help. But if that stigma and shame doesn't go away, people will not want to seek help to get better from their addiction. And
Yeah.
so a lot of that is, we as a society need to understand, addiction is not a moral failure. Um, if you want to argue it, we can argue it, but it is a disease. There has been proven research on it, and it the people who are going through it don't have control. And so, just if you open up and just say hello, how are you doing, just be open to, with them, be vulnerable, be honest. It goes a long way, and we need to, and that goes to everyone as well. And we need to remember that, because it's very easy to judge and drive down the street and see someone homeless and just go, "Oh geez, what the hell happened to them?" Why don't you get out of the car and ask, because it might be a hell of a story.
Yeah.
you know you just never know. And there's been some wonderful people that, when I'm downtown working, some wonderful people who are selling street roots, which I love. Great news source down there, and helps the people out who are struggling. uh, Wonderful stories, and you find out how they get down there, and what they're doing. um, it's sad, but they're just trying to cope. And so, and a lot of them have really wonderful ideas on how to fix the system. And we think we have these experts up high, and always sitting at the top, but these people who are going through it, living it day by day, you talk to them, and they have such wonderful ideas, and, to be honest, pretty inexpensive ideas. To
Yeah.
what, as a federal government or state government, we always want these lavish things and the perfect solution, but that's never going to happen. So, um, we need those people who have gone through it, who are going through it, at the head of the table. And you see it here locally on the news, the commercials for people running for Secretary of State, and different county seats, finally coming out and say, my mother, um, my parent has dealt with opioid and meth addiction, or I'm in long-term recovery. So these are the people we need at these, up at the
Mhm.
seats, giving
Yeah.
a voice to these people so we can start making change.
Well, and two, it's like if we were to dissect the brains of of users, they are literally the smartest people on the
Mm-hmm.
planet. Like there's something to that, you know, like my kids are pretty smart, you know, but I'm like, yeah, that's great and everything, but what about everything else? Like how's your character? How's your this? How's your that? I mean, like there's so much to it than just I'm saying two things at once really, but the people that put weight on certain things
Mm-hmm.
is not where the weight goes.
Mm-hmm.
Like someone who wants to judge someone for being a druggie or whatever, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh well, they're not that smart. Well, actually, they're probably one of the smartest people ever. Like nothing
Yeah.
goes. Like nothing should. So like with my kids being like, well, I'm really smart. They put a lot of weight on being smart, and I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
there's so much more to life than that. You can't
Yeah.
just be that. Like you need to be able to think through things. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I find so touching about your story and about your brother is there's something about when he came to you and said that he had taken the opiates or your pills or whatever. At
Mm-hmm.
that point, he had been off and on addicted for a long time, from what you said.
Yeah. From what
And
we believe. Yeah.
for him to say that, like to be honest and
Mm-hmm.
just go, I think that is so powerful about who he is because he wanted to it's like he wasn't choosing that. Like he wanted to
No.
be in a good
No.
place, you know,
Yeah.
like
He wanted
which
to
is
feel
so
normal.
devastating.
And
And
sorry to cut you off. I was just during
yeah.
that, one of the most devastating things I found out after his passing. I was able to hack into his accounts due to his wonderful passwords, but I found his Uber receipts, um, and one of the most, and this goes to show just how far addiction will take you. Um, it was a week of Thanksgiving, so about 2 to 3 weeks before he passed, and my parents came over. We were hosting that year, and so James spent the night from Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Thursday we had a wonderful Thanksgiving. Friday, me, my dad, and my brother woke up and went fishing on the Oregon coast with the guide we go with once a year. Um, and we got home. It was a Civil War day. Oregon Ducks versus Oregon State Beavers. We watched that. It was just a wonderful day. And we had dinner. We were watching a movie, and then all of a sudden, he just kind of goes. It was around 7 o'clock at night. He goes, "Oh, the person, he's running a condo from his friend. He's like, oh, he is dropping off a mail key, and I need to go get it." And it's like, well, there's a doorman down there. Like he can just drop it off there. And he's like, no, I have to go get it because he's leaving. I can't remember the whole story, but like he's leaving the state tomorrow. The whole thing just never added up. My mom was like, oh, do you want me to drive you or, whatever it may be. He goes, no, I already called an Uber. No big deal. And so in my mind, I was kind of timing because I go downtown every day, so I know how long it takes to go downtown and back. So I was timing the Uber drive, and kind of giving 10 to 15 minutes of, he might talk to his friend for 10, 15 minutes, whatever it may be, or go up to his condo. But what I find out was, looking at the Uber receipt that night, the map, um, is he drove, and we live way out in West Beaverton, basically out by Mountainside High School, which is like right on the rural line, basically. He drove from there, took an Uber from there all the way to Gresham and back. That's a 90-mile drive. It was about $90, something like that, $85, so he could pick up pills. And when I found that, just thinking about that whole week, um, just devastated me because here we were as a family. He ran a 5K with his friend Wednesday night, came over Thursday. We had a wonderful Thanksgiving. We went fishing as a family on Friday. Last time fishing, as my brother, my dad, and I, watched the Civil War, had dinner, watched a movie, and then his addiction. And this is, just how far it takes someone to take an Uber from here all the way out to Gresham, which is the east side of Portland.
Yeah, way far
um,
away.
yeah, and to come all the way back, it just it just dumbfounded me. And when I saw that, it kind of cemented, the feelings you have about addiction, but then it just kind of cemented it. It just visualized it like, wow, his cravings were so bad at that moment that he had to go all the way out there just to feel okay. And that just like, yeah, that one, like, definitely, I think, hurt the most of all the things. Just knowing that we were as a family together, really our last week together, or last weekend together as a family, and his addiction, his cravings, he had to go get those pills just to feel normal. And that one just really just devastated me. And that's a that's one thing I think about quite often. So yeah, the whole situation just sucks. I mean, everyone asks, try to put a word on it, and it's the only word I can think of. It just sucks. Addiction sucks. Grieving sucks. Just trying to, it took me up until the last month to finally have motivation again, to kind of feel normal. But like, as we were talking about before the podcast, the change in with the pandemic, and not going to work every day, not having that routine, um, I started feeling something different. And like I said, it's really the first time I've actually been grieving, since his death, because I kind of threw you know, all my energy into my day-to-day job, and then also the nonprofit since then. And it was just go, 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 and do podcasts and this and that, whatever it may be, hang out with the family. And I just never and I didn't know how to.
Sure.
And finally, with this different, change, my body was telling me something, and I was just kind of like run down, and finally just kind of said, okay, I need to stop for a bit. Like, I need to recharge. And I finally realized it was like just me grieving about my brother finally. And again, it's just, there's been so many different emotions over the last, 18 months, 17 months.
It has not
Um,
been long.
no, it hasn't. And there's, been a lot of anger, just about the whole situation, that just, not him, but just anger in general of his death, and everything that's kind of led to it, and everything after. And so finally, just been kind of, the last few weeks, just been like processing things. And I finally realized, like, it's like, oh, that's grieving. That's, you're trying to reconcile all the thoughts and stuff in your mind, and make sense of them, and kind of move forward. Um, so yeah, I mean, that's a different subject, different conversation as well. But you just kind of need to let your body heal. People just, it's not not to be so judgmental all the time, and top each other, all that kind of stuff. So we're seeing
Yeah.
that now.
Well, and a lot of like with the pandemic stuff, it's like those people that are lashing out and being really upset, they're in a way grieving in some way that they don't know. It's like
Mm-hmm.
this is beyond political at this point.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a matter of like, you better just step back and look at the big picture, because this is for the long haul.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I mean, and people, getting frustrated at people, trying to open their businesses. But, you need to understand as well, someone who has poured their heart and soul into a business is almost like a child, right? I mean, they've invested so much time and money and effort, and then for that to be taken away, and almost just, buried,
yeah,
they're gonna, yeah, people are gonna do, different things. And instead of people saying, oh, how dumb they are, they're, breaking public health protocol and stuff. Yes, they may, but you also need to understand, their business, that's their lifeline, that's how they pay the bills, and that's what they're, that's how they do things. And that's almost like, your child being ripped away from you. The amount of time and
yeah.
effort you put into a small business, or a business in general. um and so we need to understand, people, we're all different, we're going to do different things. The majority of us, the news likes to pick the fringes,
The
and
things that are going
go
to
with
piss you off.
yeah, exactly, so they can get
Things that are
headlines.
going to piss you off is what's going to be brought up.
Yeah, and so we don't remember, the majority of us are following protocols, and staying home as we can. And but if you do see that, start thinking about the different side. Start thinking why that person is doing it, instead of just your point of view. And
Yeah.
so when we start thinking that way, we can start coming to a common, ground, and start talking in a way that I think is respectable, and will really help, our society, because everything now is so individualistic with Instagram and all the social media, and look at me and look at this. And, society has just kind of forgot, about community. And, as a human race, we're all about socialization, but social media is kind of taken that way. It's more of, look what I'm building right now. Look at me versus, how are you doing?
Yeah.
Um, how can I help you today? And so, um, again, just being small service acts like that can go a long way for people. So,
I think so. And then to top with the people that are struggling, I mean, this is like, you might be pissed off about someone not wearing a mask somewhere, but then someone
mhm,
else is, why would anyone who sees you act like that, why would anyone want to come tell you I
mhm,
have a problem?
yeah,
Like, it just spreads bad.
yeah,
It just spreads bad. I don't care what your opinion is. It's still an opinion. It's still it's your right to have your opinion, but what does that do?
mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know. It just
Well, yeah, I mean, we've seen everyone now has become a health expert, and everyone has a PhD in virology and all that kind of stuff. So, it just, we live in a very interesting time. And I mean, we're kind of, I know we're getting off topic here, but it's very interesting to talk about, because there's, again, it comes to this pandemic, and you can see how fragile our society is,
mhm.
um, when we're just thrust into this situation within 2 months, and the chaos it has caused, and what may ensue in the future in terms of, the mental health aspect of it. Long-term isolation, leads to anxiety, depression, things like that. So, we really need to, I don't want to say start from the ground up, but really need
Starts with
to.
yourself though.
Yeah, it does. That is very true. It does start with yourself. And so, there are, don't be afraid to, seek out a therapist and talk to someone. I have, about my anxiety, and also about my brother passing. I know countless others who have too. So, there's always room for improvement, and people just, it's there. You just need to put the work in, and those outcomes will be achieved. So,
Yeah, that is great advice with all of this. I mean, just in wrapping this up too, so anyone who's listening, struggling, reach out to someone, talk to someone, even if it's not calling a therapist right away, which, it's hard to, when you're in a struggling state, to even have the energy to call a therapist, if you think about it.
that's a good point. Yeah.
Um, which is why I like when someone is, say they're like, have a suicide attempt and they go to an ER, the ER automatically sets it up, and then you're basically almost transferred to a, like they have that set up. But
Yeah.
for people that don't have that yet, or haven't reached that point, thank goodness, but still reaching out to that one person that would listen to you right then
Mhm.
and there, find that person, because like you said, isolation is no good.
No,
And
it's not.
it's not, and secrets aren't good, and the addiction wants you to be alone, um
Hmm.
and anxiety wants you to feel alone, and it's not true, it's a lie. So yeah, I guess being that person that someone can come to, and also the person that's struggling, find that person that you can go to, right?
Hmm.
So there's that. um and in listening to you talk too with prevention, prevention's a big thing.
Yeah.
um Genetics, figuring out, getting the knowledge, like that sounds like something that you really wanted to glean towards after your brother, and even before, just kind of getting to what is all of that, and what, getting off the stigma. We're
Hmm.
here to tell you the stigma goodbye.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's no, there is nothing, no rhyme or reason, in some cases, in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
So like when your brother said to your mom, like that's something that sticks with her, and you is just like with the wisdom teeth, like,
Hmm.
um oh, that feels good, I feel like myself. Like there's some things that, depression runs in my family hardcore,
Hmm.
um and addiction and stuff too, and I am like a hawk when it comes to this kind of stuff. Like,
Hmm.
and I do have my little concerns that I have in the back of my head, where it's like, I'm going to
Sure.
investigate that further, or like, wonder what that's going to turn into, or this or that, because grades on the report card aren't necessarily my number one concern. It's like, I mean, just taking a look at the big picture and just being like, looking at those kind of things too, would you say prevention, welcome grief,
Mm-hmm.
find the person to talk to, be a source of someone to talk to.
Yep.
Um, is that good things
Yeah.
for people to walk away? Would you like to add anything to that?
No, I think you kind of nailed it right there. Just, be open. Just if someone comes to you with their problem, don't think that their problem is not worthy, because it
Mm,
is. That's what they're going through at that time. So just have open ears and listen, and that goes a long way. You don't have to say anything either. Just listen to them.
yeah,
And if they ask for help, then help. But a lot of time, people, I think, are just seeking out someone to listen. So
yeah. Well, Erik, thank you so much for being vulnerable with your story and James and what you're doing with Henry's Uncle's podcast and your nonprofit. We'll have all that information posted as well on here. Um, but just in closing, with your grief, this is so new, and just how it's awesome that you're welcoming your grief and
mhm.
and getting through that. So my heart is with you on that.
Oh, thank you.
And a lot of people that are listening, I'm sure, are like, oh my gosh, like, yes, that have experienced loss especially, but um that it's brave. It's brave to go down the grief route. It's brave
Yeah.
and not easy. So anyway, thank you so much for listening, you guys. Walk away with something and spread the love. Don't have fear. What was the other thing that, oh, surrender to the circumstance, find the people, and you're definitely not alone. So
Yeah.
leave it with that. Thank you
Yeah.
guys.
Thank you.